welcome back to the YouTube channel. I recorded a podcast episode yesterday on a cervical fluid crash course, aka the discharge that you find in your underwear crash course. And I figured it would probably make a lot of sense to do a YouTube video on this too, because cervical fluid is like a visual thing. Like if I can give you a visual on what different cervical fluid looks like, that'd probably be really helpful. So we're gonna chat today about what cervical fluid is, why we get it, how we can decode its meaning, and what it looks like. So let's dive right in. So if you don't know what cervical fluid, aka cervical mucus is, I'm sure we've all had the experience. At 16 years old, we're in high school, we're going to the bathroom completely unassuming, and we pull down our pants to go pee, and lo and behold, in our underwear is the frightening sight of this like super creamy or like dry and crumbly discharge. And we thought we were dying, and we were too embarrassed to ask anyone about it or tell anyone about it. But we didn't really know what it was, and so we just kind of kept quiet, and we have found it in our underwear for the last however many years of life, and have never actually known what it was. That's cervical fluid. And it's so crazy because it is this thing that all women experience, and like probably 90% of us have no clue what it is and think it's a bad thing, think it means there's something wrong with us, when in fact cervical fluid is actually extremely normal and extremely healthy. So let's first dive into what the heck this stuff even is. So if you do not already know, we have a whole crazy dance of things that go on throughout our cycle each month. And the main event of our cycle is this thing that occurs somewhere around day 15 called ovulation. Ovulation is when our ovary releases an egg in hopes that it'll get fertilized by a sperm to make a baby, and this only happens once per month. So once per month we have this egg that gets released from the ovary, and it sits into the fallopian tube waiting there for a sperm to come along, and that egg lives for 24 hours. If no sperm comes along to fertilize it, after 24 hours it'll die, and then we will not have another egg that can be fertilized again until we ovulate in our next cycle. We ovulate once per cycle. But of course, for the sperm that needs to come along and fertilize this egg, it can be a really treacherous journey, because he's got to enter through the vaginal cavity, he's got to go up the cervix, into the uterus, all the way across the uterus, through the fallopian tube to that egg. And that's a pretty long, intense travel for this little guy. And so what our body, so sweet of us, does every single month to assist the sperm in traveling towards that egg is it creates cervical fluid. So you can think of cervical fluid kind of like a slip and slide that your body creates for the sperm to easily travel towards the egg. It gives us this super slippery, watery substance that's just that perfect path for that sperm to flow. But of course, the only time we need the slip and slide to be in business is during ovulation, in the days leading up to ovulation and the day of ovulation. Because outside of that, there's no egg to be fertilized, so there's no reason to help the sperm travel anywhere. So that's why you'll notice that you only produce cervical fluid or cervical mucus in a few days, maybe a week every single month of your cycle, and then normally it'll dry up for the most part. And cervical fluid can come in many different forms and consistencies, and that's what we're gonna dive into today. What does different kinds of cervical fluid look like? What do they mean? And what does that tell us about our health? So let's break it down. There are 4 main kinds of cervical fluid, and they range on a scale from dry to watery. And this is because as we get closer to ovulation, our cervical fluid is going to get more and more watery, more and more slippery, because we're getting that slip and slide up and ready for business. And just to backtrack here for a second, if you don't know kind of the layout of your cycle, ovulation occurs somewhere in the middle. So what happens is our period will end, and we will enter what is called the follicular phase, which is the phase where our body is preparing for ovulation. And from there, we will ovulate, and then we will go into our luteal phase, and then we'll go into our next period, and the whole cycle will start again. So after our period ends, and we're entering the follicular phase, that's when you're going to start seeing the cervical fluid begin to produce leading up to that ovulation day. And then what should happen is that after ovulation occurs, since we don't really need that cervical fluid anymore, it is going to start to dry up and it'll remain pretty dried up for the rest of your cycle until your next one comes. So let's break down the different kinds of cervical fluid. So the first kind of cervical fluid is really dry, crumbly, flaky, and pasty. This is typically what you will see in your underwear either right after your period ends or after ovulation. It is considered non-fertile cervical fluid, which means we are nowhere near ovulation because it is not watery or slippery enough to create that great environment for a sperm to survive and travel. So this is what you would typically find in your underwear at the end of the day, where it's like dried up and kind of like flaking off of your underwear. And this is entirely normal. Our body at times can produce this all cycle long outside of our ovulatory window. The next level of cervical fluid is moving up in the watery scale. This is when you will typically find something that looks like this in your underwear. It looks like lotion. It has this white, lotiony consistency. It doesn't dry up. It doesn't get super flaky. It just stays just like this. There will usually be like a thin little streak of it in your underwear that you'll notice at the end of the day. When you get that lotiony consistency cervical fluid, this is often a sign that you are starting to move into your fertile window. You're starting to move into that window around ovulation. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. You'll notice that progression of cervical fluid getting more watery. This is also a type of cervical fluid that can sometimes be produced outside of our ovulation window, and that can be completely normal. Since it's not considered a super watery or slippery type of cervical fluid, in contrast to the ones we will go over next, it's still considered a low fertility cervical fluid, aka we're not close to ovulation yet. Now, what you should notice next in the progression is one of two things. The most watery, most slippery type of cervical fluid can show up in two different ways. For a lot of women, it shows up like this. This egg white, slippery, this slippery egg white consistency is what a lot of our cervical fluid will often look like. It's very stretchy, very slippery, literally just like an egg white. When you see this coming out of your body, you know you are getting really close to ovulation. If you think about it, imagine how fast you would slide if you went on a slip and slide that was covered in egg whites. It would be the perfect slip and slide. And so similarly, it's going to be perfect for helping that sperm travel to the egg. What's interesting about egg white cervical fluid is you typically will not find it in your underwear. It is so slippery that it'll normally slip right out when you are going pee. So most of the time, the only time you're really going to notice or see an egg white type cervical fluid is if you're going pee and you literally look down when you're really close to ovulation, you'll see it hanging out of your body. Or sometimes after you pee and you're really close to ovulation and you wipe, you'll see that really like stretchy stuff on the toilet paper. Egg white cervical fluid is entirely normal and in fact extremely healthy. It's a sign that our hormone levels are in a great place, that we're super fertile and likely gonna have a really healthy ovulation. I made this note in the podcast that I recorded yesterday and I want to make it again. If you're on a hormone health journey and you like just recently came off of birth control, it can be normal that your body is not yet producing something like a really egg white quality cervical fluid. When I went off hormonal birth control, I did not produce egg white cervical fluid for like almost a year. It took my body a really long time to heal and regulate again before it got to that very healthy place. And that is totally okay and totally normal. So if you are just starting to heal your hormones, you just come off birth control and you aren't yet seeing that, don't freak out. I promise as long as you are caring for your body, it is going to come. And when it does come, it's a fantastic sign that you're doing a great job. But again, it's a very inconspicuous type of cervical fluid, so make sure you're on the lookout for it. I remember the first time I ever noticed it, it was completely by accident. I was going pee, I think I was like looking to check the color of my pee or something, and I looked down in the toilet, and lo and behold, this stretchy thing, so long, was hanging out of my vagina. And I was like, what the heck? I knew that women got it and I knew that it was a sign of health, but I just never experienced it. But it was so cool to see that finally happen, and now every single cycle I get it, which is so cool to witness. But I would never find it like on my underwear or anything, so you have to really be on the lookout for that one. The final type of cervical fluid, which is on par with the egg white. They're both like the same level of super watery, fertile quality, is gonna look something like this. If you have ever had that experience where you are just sitting down minding your own business and suddenly you feel this rush of water come out of you, like you feel like you peed yourself, but like you're not really sure because you didn't have any control over it, like it just felt like it fell out of your body, that is watery cervical fluid. You did not pee yourself, do not worry. There's nothing wrong. It is just a really, really healthy form of cervical fluid that's showing you that you are really, really close to ovulation, if not currently ovulating. And the way that you can tell the difference between watery cervical fluid and pee, if you are unsure, is that watery cervical fluid will not dry. So this wet spot on your underwear will stay there for the rest of the day. Whereas if you dribble a little pee out, that spot on your underwear will dry up within a few hours. But you'll feel it. You'll feel that just like, just water just drops. And sometimes it'll be so much that it'll go, like if you're wearing leggings, it'll go straight through and you'll see that drop of water in your leggings. And it can feel so embarrassing if you don't know what it is, because it's like, oh my gosh, like did I just pee myself? What is going on? This is so embarrassing. But it is in fact extremely normal and healthy. So if you know that you experience that every single month, I just encourage you to wear a panty liner or something when you're getting close to ovulation, or maybe don't wear like thin leggings if you are worried about being embarrassed by it. So those are the 4 different kinds of cervical fluid. Super simple, straightforward. There's that clear progression of dry to watery, which follows the progression of our body preparing for ovulation and ovulating. So in a healthy cycle, you should notice after your period ends, your body will start producing the lower quality cervical fluid, moving to the higher and higher quality until you produce something like egg white or watery. You'll typically produce that for a handful of days, maybe 4 or 5 days at most. And then we should witness that clearing up and either drying up completely or going back to that dry or crumbly or pasty cervical fluid for the rest of our cycle until we are getting close to ovulating again in our next cycle. So it's really cool how this presence of cervical fluid communicates with us directly what phase of our cycle we are in. And if you want to take that one step further, cervical fluid is one of the 3 fertility signs that is used in the fertility awareness method, aka natural birth control. I highly, highly recommend reading the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler. If you want to dive into the world of natural birth control, maybe I'll do a separate YouTube video on that one day, but we won't dive into it right now. But just know that cervical fluid is a phenomenal tool for telling you so many different things about your body, including when you can and can't get pregnant. One final thing that I want to add here. I think it is a misconception among a lot of women that cervical fluid or the discharge you find in your underwear is supposed to smell bad. I think a lot of women have just come to believe that like really intense bad vaginal odor or discharge odor or anything like that is normal and they just have to deal with it, but it in fact is not normal, and it is a sign that there is some kind of bacterial imbalance in your vagina. Healthy discharge and a healthy vagina has a scent to it, like anything has a scent, but it's a very neutral, mild odor. It should not be super intense, it should not be super fishy, anything like that. If you are experiencing that, know that there is a lot that you can do about it, and it can be quite simple. I dive deep into that in the podcast episode that I recorded yesterday. So if you want to dive into why you might be struggling with vaginal odor, I'm going to point you towards that podcast episode, as well as one that I did with Abby Fernandini, where we also dove into this subject. You can search the Intentional Health Podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and the episodes that you're looking for are right here. But that is all for our cervical fluid crash course today. I hope you found this interesting, and hopefully it made all of the confusion that you had at 16 years old finally make sense and make you feel not crazy. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, please leave me a comment, subscribe to this channel. It would mean the absolute world to me. And please, please, please share this video, share the podcast episode with a friend or a teen girl in your life that needs to learn these things in her teens, unlike we had to learn them in our 20s. That is it. I will see you next time. I am rooting for you.